Hey folks, welcome back to Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Today's episode, we're reviewing Part-Time Gods of Fate by Third Eye Games. This is a second sort of engine application for this concept of the game, as opposed to their house system, which they used in the earlier version. I've read both of them, and personally, I think the Fate version fits the theme and the needs of the game a lot more than the original version did. What Part-Time Gods assumes is that you are a mortal who, at some point in your history, by intent, by ritual, by accident, by endowment, has become partly divine. You have the power, the spark of divinity inside of you, and it powers certain abilities that you have. This is an urban fantasy type setting, which can be as light as you want it to be or as dark as you can. One of the things I really like about the setting and the way the engine works is that you could really tune in either version. At the end of the review, I'll be giving you a couple of ideas for ways that you can specifically apply known properties, known settings into this sort of version. Now, with that divine spark comes a few things. So you become essentially the god of blank. And that blank is usually something fairly specific. So you won't become the god of gods or the god of all reality. It's something like the god of thunder or the god of hunger, of blood, of drink, etc. Now, that definition is part of an aspect. Remember, this is a Fate game, and it does require the Fate Core rulebook. If you don't have the Fate Core rulebook, or you're just sort of against it, you can use the Fate SRD, although really, for the price and the general application of it, the Fate Core rulebook is a pretty good investment for you to have. So, you're the god of blank, and that defines one of your aspects. Most of the other aspects you have, at least at the beginning, are a balance of the dichotomy of your both divine and mortal nature. So, the things that make Part-Time Gods different than, say, your standard Fate game is you have a certain set of abilities that come from your divine nature. One of those are manifestations, which are a set of divine skills that allow you to do things that mortals cannot do. Small sidebar before I go into that, one of the other things that separates the divine from the mortals is the ability to use fate points. So it assumes that you and all the significant villains that you are going to be facing have fate points, whereas your average mortal cop on the street does not necessarily have those to help fuel his abilities. Now, the manifestations allow you to do specific things that are sort of unique to your godhood. Those fall under, it's a fairly broad umbrella of 8 skills. Those are Aegis, protection, beckon, summoning, journey, travel, minion, something you can call up to help work for you, oracle, being able to predict the future, puppetry, controlling people or things, ruin, destruction, and shaping, altering existing things. You have a version of the pyramid set up for the manifestations, +3, +2, +1, that allow you to do different things. Each of the manifestations has a specific focus that you will have. For example, if you are the god of blood, as one of the provided characters is, and your ruin ability is bloody whips come out of your wrists that can allow you to do damage. That is to kind of give you specific focus. That way, if someone else really also wants to play a god of blood, they can have other abilities. And it also prevents player wankery of, I'm the god of blood, so I can also control lemonade. I'm sure we all know that player. There are some slight modifications you can have on the manifestations. For example, as we mentioned earlier, if you were the god of death versus the god of the dead, they're fairly close, but the god of death could be enacting the actual moment of death and everything about it, versus god of the dead, it already has to be dead for you to be able to work with him. Another example would be the god of ice is a narrow enough focus. The god of winter may be a bit too broad. So, the second level of things that make you divine are your entitlements. These are divine stunts. These are harder to nail down into an easy list, much like stunts were. One thing I like they did here that Fate Core does not do is it gives you a really good list of example stunts. I understand they didn't want this to turn into a master list of feats, but I'm a guy who needs examples. So, these divine stunts oftentimes are fueled by a fate point, oftentimes require you to make a roll of something, be it knowledge, a certain skill, or your highest manifestation, against a good level challenge, +3. Bonds, which are your connections, these sort of define your mortal nature. They are connections to things, either they're mental or emotional, and they're either to people, to groups or organizations or to places. You'll notice there aren't things. Like I can't have a manifestation, I can't have a bond to my iPad. Why? Because things are very ephemeral in the divine sense, whereas locations, people, or organizations are not. Theologies are a sort of a group of gods based on a common philosophy or a common theme that you belong to. So it's not like you're an Aesir or an Olympian. It is sort of you want to return gods to their old standards, or you want to help empower mortals as much as you can. Other things that make you divine, there's immortality, although you can die. In fact, the way that you can truly die is, well, if you die by taking out in combat and the enemy gets to define what it is, you rise 3 days later. Hint. And there is also sort of this, you also lose one of your refresh to sort of limit your general abilities there. You can also sense the spark from other divine people. I know you're there, Highlander. That's sort of a theme that came up in my mind. You can also devour the power of another god. Now that's sort of the end of that god as you absorb their divine essence, their spark into your spark, and you gain some of their abilities, but also some of their mind and thought process. So please, kindly, do not eat the back crap god unless you can absolutely help it. There are also territories. The gods pick a certain geographical location where they set up shop. The rules for building territories are very similar to the setting rules as seen in the Dresden Files role-playing game. And Dominion, which is again, it's sort of a more specific focus of your power, ice versus winter. What can you do with part-time gods? Well, as presented, it gives you an interesting little background, some setting, and some ideas for using it, but I'm never one to play a game as is. I have to tinker. And the first thing that I was thinking of when I was going through this is, this would make a really mean game of Rise of the Guardians, the animated film from a few years ago where you have Santa, the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Sandman, and Jack Frost all rising together to fight the boogeyman. Easily, you could set up each of those characters as part-time gods, and you have certain abilities that they have, certain things you are fighting, etc. In fact, once you get a decent understanding of how fate applies to this specific game, it works out very nicely for you. You could also do a Highlander-style game if you wanted to. That would take a little bit more work, but it's there. You could do, this wouldn't be your standard urban fantasy with werewolves and vampires and ghosts, oh my, but you could do variations on that. For example, your god of hunger could be a vampire, or your god of rage could have some bestial aspects and be a werewolf, if you really wanted to shoehorn it in there. Other options include almost anything written by Neil Gaiman. You would have to really up the power, but you could certainly do any of the endless through this as well. I'm very fond of this game. I'm quite excited by it. I think Fate is a much more natural fit for the themes and the abilities of these gods than the original system for which it was written. Not to detract from that, it works very well, but I think Fate just is a more natural fit for it. Maybe it's because I instinctively understand Fate better than I do the original system. I like it a lot. If you are looking for an urban fantasy game with a different touch, I think this is very definitely the game for you. There are very few games out there where you actually get to play divine beings, so I think it's a lot of fun. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.